secondary schools. So we did that for each one. You can see the different values, the different FTE that would be lost if we were to increase the PTR. The other thing to note would be charter schools. Charter schools receive the same funding through the same statutes as we do, or as the district does as a whole. So flat funding for them also means diminished spending power, and they would be able to, they may have PTR increases or decreases as they go along, but that's something that they determine with their APC on how they spend their money. A lot of the charter schools do have some carryover that could mitigate some of the reductions, just like the district does. You know, that's up to them to spend it. This is really all we had for the PTR discussion. So we want to get this out front. And then if you guys have any questions or any discussion regarding the PTR or have anything else you'd like to look at, now would be a good time probably to discuss that.
Questions? Let's see whose hands. I'm not seeing any hands up, Andy.
What,
Hold on. Oh, I see Kelly. Kelly?
Yeah, thank you so much for providing this chart to start with. The biggest number is increasing PTR by 5 across the K-12 system. Are we assuming that we're going to be bringing the deficit down to a $32 million platform through all other, I mean, like if we don't approve all other cuts, we might have a greater magnitude than $32 million. That's more of a statement than a question, but I guess the question is, what does the PTR increase look like if we need to fill a greater gap than $32.2 million?
Well, that kind of depends on how big that gap is. If you can assume another 6 or so million for each PTR increase, and that'll diminish a little bit as you go higher. But yeah, it really just depends on the appetite for making those other reductions and whatever money we might have available in fund balance and remaining ARP money, and potentially the use of the school bond debt reimbursement to offset some of those losses. So there's a lot of things at play here. But if we were to go all to PTR, then potentially it couldn't necessitate higher than a +5.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I would like to note that Member Donnelly did join us. Yes, Member Wilson.
The FTEs, can you say if that's teachers, if that's TAs, or I mean, is it pretty much encompass a variety of full-time positions?
That is only teaching FTE, so directly in front of students, and it's going to be classroom teachers and the associated specialists, the art, music, health, PE, the teachers that provide the planning time, those kind of ancillary services for the students, but it is all teaching FTE. You might have a few more savings in kindergarten TAs, depending on where those PTRs are, that PTR is at. So if you were to, have fewer kindergarten teachers, you need fewer kindergarten aides, but that's probably immaterial to the discussion here, with those being 3.5-hour employees.
Thank you. Other questions? Member Jacobs, followed by Member Higgins.
Thank you, President Bellamy. Are we able to say definitively how many of the, at a 5 PTR increase, how many of the 274 FTE are currently vacant, or is that occupied FTE at this point?
This is representative of budgeted FTE, so many of those would be vacant. If you were to increase that many, then many of them would be turned over throughout the year through retirements at the end of the year. So there is going to be some attrition. It wouldn't mean necessarily 274 pink slips if you went that route, but it would definitely mean more kids in the classroom and fewer teachers overall.
Madam President, can I follow up?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So Andy, just to put a finer point on it, I guess, do we have a line drawn, or a best estimate at this point as to where within that number of 274, if it's higher than 274, where that estimated line in the sand will be, where we go from vacant positions to occupied positions?
I think that would become on when we're trying to estimate what our attrition savings will be for the following year. So we see how many vacancies we had throughout this year, what we expect to be able to fill next year, which is kind of a moving target. And right now it's about $25 million of attrition that we have. Expect that to go up a little bit for next year, but frankly, it's just in our ability to recruit and retain staff at this point. It's the impact you have, I guess, on that is once you get that attrition estimate, if you get it too big and people fill those positions, then we're in a position where we don't have enough money potentially to fund them all. So I'm a little hesitant on chasing that attrition savings up really high, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome, Member Higgins. You're next.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late. I had trouble getting in and frustrated, a few little odds and ends, but that's okay. I'll take a pill or something. Excuse me, I got a phone ringing. I'm just getting rid of it. Just two questions, really. First of all, when it comes to the PTR, when it comes to special education, my understanding we can't reduce that spending, or we got limitations on that from all kind of requirements. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, there is a maintenance of effort that we have to go through with special education where we cannot reduce them proportionately more than gen ed, unless there's like some exigent reason. We've done it in the past where we didn't meet, or we got around it by, at one point we had moved a bunch of nurses that were classified as special education into the school's budgets, which ended up being like an 80 FTE reduction or something. But we were able to work with the state and get a waiver on the maintenance of effort there. But it does have to be proportional to, like, if you're cutting increases overall, you can reduce special education. But I don't think with maintenance of effort, you can't just reduce them more than the gen ed side. Okay. The other way you can get around the maintenance of effort too is like if you have positions held vacant for a long period of time. Like I believe when Dr. Browder was here, we ended up reducing, I want to say 70 some FTE and TAs because we just couldn't hire them over the years. So we were able to reduce those and still meet maintenance of effort because for the length at which they were vacant.
Thank you. And Madam President, thank you. Question I pose is simply when we were providing some of the extra funds we were getting in to maintain PTR and maintain the status quo for a period of time in the last couple of years, has some of that additional funding going to charter schools or assisted charter schools in maintaining their same level at all?
Yes, the charter schools have gotten their proportionate share of the ESSER funding. With the exception on the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which is the CARES and ARP Act, or the SRSA and ARP Act, the homeschools did not get their proportionate share of those funds just because they were uniquely set up to be virtual instruction to begin with. So with the exception of the virtual schools, then they're looking at a cliff as well. Yeah, potentially. Depends. It's dependent on the school, but yeah, some of them are looking at a cliff as well.
Okay, thank you, Member Higgins. Dr. Stock?
Yes, just a comment about attrition to answer Member Jacobs' question a little bit. So the vast majority of the ones listed on these charts here with regards to reductions in FTE could be covered and probably would be covered through attrition. Where the exceptions would occur would be in specialty areas. So if you raise PTR, for example, 3 at the high school level, you're not going to be able to run your class sizes in core areas of social studies, science, math, etc. for graduation requirements up too high. So that means you're probably going to be looking at reduction in the elective offerings, which sometimes there's not enough attrition in very unique elective categories, in which case there would be some pink slips that might have to be given depending on what each high school would have to reduce. Overall, though, attrition usually takes care of these type of numbers, but there could be some exceptions depending on how deep or if at all the board chooses to go the PTR route.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Member Holloman in the meeting. Any other, excuse me, any other questions? Okay, I don't see any, Andy's. Oh, Member Jacobs, saved by the bell.
Thank you, Madam President. This is something maybe to put a pin in, maybe we don't need an answer right now, but is administration compiling a list where, can each classroom potentially that would have to see an increase of a 5 PTR or potentially more have physical space for that to occur? And if not, are we compiling alternative locations for how a cohort or a class, which would exceed current class sizes by 5, 6, 7, would be accommodated? So is that kind of planning going on, and will that kind of list be presented to us at some point for consideration about just the logistics of actually teaching a class of these sizes, which would include these sizes?
Dr. Stock?
So thank you, Member Jacobs, President. So the answer to the question is we don't have a list started right now, and there's a couple different reasons why. First of all, the PTR discussion starts to overlap with issues regarding master scheduling. So there are ways in which administrators can create different schedules to accommodate the rising PTR. So for example, we've researched in the past looking at trimester schedules, right? Trimester schedules is a solution to when these things get really tight. Other examples, depending on what happens with the middle school situation, changing the type of schedules we run could allow more elective offerings or more opportunities for students to engage. So it's hard to answer your question, Member Jacobs, because when you say, are we making a list of which classrooms would be overcrowded? Well, that's assuming nothing changed with regards to scheduling. If we changed our scheduling, it could change some of the ways those courses in those classrooms are used. So, but we don't have a current list of classrooms that might have trouble with the class sizes. And Sven, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, or we can pick that up later. I don't know what the board wants to hunker down on this one.
I was going to say the same thing.
So if I can't remember which board member asked the question. It might have been, it was recent, maybe Member Donnelly, but the question had to do with, had we given thought to having university-sized classes?
Yeah, that was
in
me.
our high schools? Okay, so my question is, where would, I don't know that we have 150, 120, 150. We don't even have room for that. But where does that fit into the PTR if that were to be an option? And it may be a Board Connect question. You don't have to answer it now, except, I know what my own feelings are, but in the context of PTR, I don't know how that would work.
So this is Mark again. So and this doesn't directly relate to Member Donnelly's question, but we do run some classes that have extra size spaces to extra large levels. For example, Sven was sharing with all of us earlier today that we have PE classes of 55 when we have a big gym space and the type of instruction is conducive to it. There are some places that do what I think Member Donnelly is referring to as like a lecture hall.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a beginning level social studies period of where we could have 50 or 60 people in a lecture hall doing a lecture style, university style system. But, I don't know. I know we're running seminars and other things at some classes that Sven would probably know if that technique is being used very much currently.
Right now it is not being used currently. The spaces in our buildings are pretty small to be able to offer such things as that. Even the auditoriums that we have are used a lot during the days. So just having space for big classes like that is pretty, there's not very many of those in any of our high schools.
Beyond PE.
Yeah, beyond PE.
Can I chime in? Just pedagogically, right? University classrooms are not just lectures, right? Lectures are paired with small seminars, discussion sections. So you would still need small spaces in PTR that would enable actual discussion, I think.
Yes. Thank you, Member Lessons. I see your hand, Member Holloman.
I was just going to offer this as historical. In the late 90s, the early design for the new Diamond High School was looking at science rooms that were large lecture style rooms that shared a rather elaborate laboratory space, meaning that classes could only do labs in concert with each other, like sign up for a day, 1 day a week or something like that. But it was in direct contradiction to what the published plan, instructional plan was, which was they wanted lots of hands-on experiences, like day to day, you would expect kids to do some exercises, maybe using water in a sink or something simple, but kind of interactive science, as opposed to what would have to be a lecture, say 4 days a week, and 1 day where you went into kind of a marvelously outfitted lab, which is great for advanced students, but not so much for your lower level students that have a hard time grasping concepts. So I'll say it's been looked at, but the buildings aren't built that way. And it just couldn't, I don't see how it could actually happen physically, but it has been talked about.
Yeah. Thank you, Member Holloman. Okay, now I'm not seeing any more hands. Let's continue, Mr. Ratcliffe.
All right, thank you. So the PTR is fairly straightforward, especially compared to once we start talking about some of this admin definitions, and once we get into the discussion on that. Just to start out though, there was a comment at the November 15th board meeting that administration has increased by 50 over the last 10 years. So we found the source information of that because it had been shared around, and it turns out it was this thing you see on the left is a table from our financial statements that shows the type of employee or the number of employees by type, or the FTE count. So in just looking at the administration line, it did increase by about 34, which, historically that doesn't really kind of jive with what I experienced as far as, kind of having just the historical knowledge of it. So I did go back through and kind of reconcile what changed between FY12 and FY21. And I guess I should start by these categories on the left are one definition of how we break out things, and it's by an object code level. So within administration, there's going to be people in everyone from school board and superintendent down to some behavior specialists or analysts in the schools. But by and large, the administration and technical categories perform a lot of the same work. And the technical categories are a lot of IT folks, or we have finance technicians, things like that. But starting in FY12, we had 186, we reported 186 FTE for administration. Right off the bat, the biggest thing that wasn't included in that was the administration that's in food service. So their directors, their business folks over there. They had previously been reported here in that food service line at the very bottom. So it shows 214. And then by the end of 21, it shows 177. So in fiscal year 20, we made that correction and moved those admin from the food service up into the administration line to be more reflective of what actually happened. Additionally, there was 8 FTE that was in the transportation fund that weren't accounted for anywhere for one reason or another, and those were added in FY14. So that correction was made at some point down the road as well. So then we started looking to it a little deeper, because we do have in both of those categories, we have school-based and ed center-based employees. So over that period of time for the administration, we added 12 into the admin accounts. And then in the technical, we reduced 24 in admin accounts. So a lot of that is a switch from, or overall reductions plus switching classifications for groups of employees. Predominantly, it was in the IT sector where we go for a technician to a programmer or network analyst or something, where we have these very similar job titles, but in different object codes that are the basis for this reporting. So overall, between the 2 years, once you adjust for the food service, the transportation, and then between the changes in technical and administration, we ended up decreasing by about 29 FTE between all those categories. But as that came out in the public and then it got shared around, we really wanted to take a few minutes to address why that change was there and hopefully get a better understanding what that administration line is.
Thank you. Questions, board members? Member Holloman?
So at the end of the day, did the number of bodies we employ increase at all? Or is this strictly just a shift from where the tables were updated to reflect reality?
Yeah, so it actually decreased between those two categories by 29. 12 of those decrease was in like the administration accounts, so that mostly within IT. And then another 17 were in school-based accounts, which will be security is included in there. And we can relook how this table is done, but just keeping it historically consistent. There's a lot of different things that are included in there. But yeah, much fewer bodies than before.
Okay, thank you.
Good, okay. Member Higgins? You're muted.
I thought I sounded better on mute. I'm used to seeing this not so much clustered by types of position, but by departments. Can we have a layout real quickly by departments of what the staffing has been like?
Probably not real quickly like right now, but we can certainly.
Well, I didn't mean that quick.
get that in. But yeah, I mean, you raise a great question, and we'll get into that too, the different definitions of administration. As you know, Pat, you probably know it very well, that there's been different definitions throughout the years of what constitutes that administration. So kind of the purpose of this too is we like to get more of a common understanding what those definitions are, and then going forward, what the board would like to see as far as how they're reported back.
Sure. I mean, I'd like to see, if I know HR, finance, how much we're putting in training, IT, all that to me gives me a better view of what's happening.
Right.
Other questions? Thank you, Member Higgins. Okay, let's continue.
So over the last few years, we've tried to go towards reporting everything back on the state function, the chart of accounts, so we can be consistent with other school districts and only have really one reporting structure. So really quickly kind of running through what these state functions are, and it'll be relevant in the future slides. But the first two, instruction and special ed instruction, are those staff and the materials that students are using directly in front of in-classroom instruction. So that'll be special education teachers and TAs in the classroom, and direct or instruction is just going to be regular gen ed teachers and TAs, and supplies and materials that are associated with those. Function 220, special ed support, is going to be those special education services that are pullouts, kind of social work, speech path, psychology services, physical therapy, those types of things. 300 is predominantly going to be security and counseling services. Nurses are in there as well. Those are the big costs for us. There's also like boarding schools, but we don't really have that. And then once you get into 350, this is where it gets a little more interesting as far as the determination between what is admin and what is, what would be school-based. So in function 350, we have the supervision of all the principals, which would be elementary and secondary ed, as well as professional development and development of curriculum, which was teaching and learning. So, but in there is also librarians and library aides that are at the schools. So the state classifies that group of employees all as support services for instruction. But, as you know, looking around this building, if your definition of administration is being in the Ed Center, a lot of the folks that are in this function 350 are in the Ed Center. But it's not a very clean split between the different types of services being offered to students. School administration on 400 is just principals. 450 is the school clerical staff, the AA and the front office staff at all the schools. And then 510 and 550 are both the district administration and support. So that's going to be from school board, superintendent is in 510. And then most of the other support services, HR, finance, payroll, all those are in the 550, as well as purchasing. And then operations and maintenance of plants, custodians, maintenance support, and then the management of those as well. And then community services is the last one for our rentals, and then community engagement. So that's our state chart. Looks like Ms. Lessons may have a question.
Member Lessons.
Thank you. Really quickly. So just going back to that earlier PTR FTE chart, I just wanted to clarify that all of the potential impacts of PTR increases would fall on the individuals who are in that object 100 instruction. Is that correct?
That is correct. All these are function 100. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Raise your hand so I can see you.
So that, and this is all in our budget book. There's an appendix in there that has a little better description. These are kind of truncated, but the full state chart of accounts is in our budget book if you want to go reference that as you're reading that and want to know what those things mean and what's included. So the different definitions that we've had and what does administration mean to you? So we've had several different definitions as the years go by. You know, frankly, the very easiest way and the most comparable is looking at by state function. When we produce an indirect cost rate to the state, that's what they include as administration. Our indirect cost rate's a little over 6% right now, but it's function 510 and 550. And you'll read through there and just look at all the different functions that are in those admin orgs or in those functions. So, but by and large, it is people in this building and it is the business side of things. For those of you who've been around a while, you might remember the 70-30 rule with the state, which was instruction versus instructional support. So they classified, they used to have you meet this test that where you had to have at least 70% of your cost in the instructional functions, and then everything else was instructional support. So what you see here is from 450 to 780 was the instructional support. So anything from teachers up to principals was instruction, and then the school-based clerical down to our community services was all support costs. And we had always maintained it, I think, in the 75, 78% range for the instructional costs. But that was just another definition that the state had throughout over the course of years. They did away with that a few years ago, as there was so many districts that weren't actually meeting that cost just due to their high ops and maintenance cost was predominantly the reason they couldn't meet that 70-30. So there's like just waivers going out left and right, and that's why they ended up doing away with it. A third definition might be education civil department. So anyone that's in this building, coming down about two-thirds of the way through, we have elementary and secondary education and teaching and learning. Those are the ones, as I discussed, are as far as state functions go, and they're in an instructional state function of 350, but are in this building doing the work here. But if you look at like teaching and learning, they have a lot of things in function 100 for instruction, because we centrally buy materials and curriculum that's directly in front of students. So it's not really an even split by department. If you're just looking at costs that are in the ed centers, a lot of their costs are actually pushed out to schools, and those students are the recipient of what we spend there. A fourth definition might be anything that's outside of our schools, which would be everything in this building, everything at ops and maintenance, capital planning, transportation, student nutrition, and the purchasing warehouse. Those are our facilities that we maintain. So anything not directly inside a school building. So those are some of the definitions that have been used over the years. Another couple of ways we've looked at it too is by bargaining group. If you want to look at just bargaining group, those are all the ones that we have we distinctly identify when we're doing our budgeting process. And then we've also done a circle chart. When we start looking at that outer ring of those circles and we've defined admin, what we did there is we took all the functions that are admin functions for the state. And then we took all the admin org codes that include teaching, learning, secondary, elementary education. And then we pulled out all the instructional costs from there and put those in that inner circle. So it's kind of a mashup of here's our state functions and here's our orgs, and then kind of splitting out where they overlay to be able to generate these circles. And then, there may be other definitions that other people have said as well. So that'd probably be a good time to stop and maybe discuss some of the administration definitions.
Say, Margot, this is Dave. May I please be provided with a copy of these slides? And I also was hoping to get a copy, and if you've already sent them, I'm sorry, but if you could send them again, the town hall slide set of
The survey?
Yeah, the school we've been going to, and the survey too. Yes. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And we have not sent these slides out yet, Member Donnelly, so we'll get board member copies.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, continue, Andy. I don't see any hands, any questions?
Okay, so probably thoroughly confused you with all the different options of what administration could mean to people. So as we look at that, we kind of broke it down. If you're looking at the bargaining group, here is the number of FTE we have in each bargaining group in a couple of different presentations. The first one is just general fund only. The second is general fund and grants, so we can add back the 509 or so FTE that were funded by ESER for FY23. And those aren't all teachers. I should clarify, I think 17 of those are actually IT support. But by and large, those are all teacher FTE that were included in there. Additionally, we have in the all funds presentation, which is going to include food service, and I should include bus in there somewhere too. Yeah. So that includes all funds, but you can just see the percentage of the total FTE and the percentage of total cost, just to kind of give you a mind's eye view of by bargaining group where our costs lay. If you were to extrapolate that and move it to reduction scenarios, if you were to do it by bargaining group, here's the amount that you could save based on a 1% or a 5% reduction, just looking at bargaining groups. And then we did the same thing by state function. So if you just look at the state function, so if you go down to admin, you want to save 5% of district admin, it's about $172,000 or so. But really wanted to provide this to you so you have some background of, I guess, scope of what a percentage reduction might mean by function or bargaining unit.
Yeah, that's a great slide. Thank you.
And then lastly, we did here's a summary of kind of our current reductions. I believe we had talked about this, about 20 or so FTE for those outer ring, those 16 departments, those FTE. Kind of broken down just in rough, there's about 6 IT support with between IT and virtual. There is, I believe, 2 directors, an assistant director, and a supervisor being eliminated within there. Although we'd have to add back a lower level manager for one of those positions just to continue to get the work done and have supervision over employees. I think there's 4 or 5 admin assistants and a few maintenance folks within there as well. So that's a 20 FTE that we include in the outer ring. And then we've spent, since July discussing those kind of middle ring reductions, including school closures, repurposing, Ignite, 6th grade, band and orchestra, and then metric-based staff, the middle school model, things like that. So in total, we've got about 155 FTE reduction that we've presented, and about $16 million in total. The remaining deficit being about $52 million, although, as we look forward to our next meeting on the 5th, we will present our fund balance projections and our pro forma budget. So hopefully we can get that remaining deficit down by some with kind of the savings we have based on vacancies this year.
So Andy, as people are making different decisions about employment, they're resigning, they're retiring. We won't know the retirees by now at this point, but when people leave, are we filling those positions? And that might be a question for Dr. Bryant. Are we filling positions as people leave like now, or are we just holding on those?
So at a high level, for non-campus based positions, there's a high level of scrutiny because we know that we need to cut as much as possible from the positions that don't directly impact students. So by and large, we've been holding positions vacant at the district office or, deciding to indefinitely not fill certain positions at the district office. At the campus, of course, we certainly don't want to impede schools from being fully staffed when it comes to their teachers and TAs. Really, our strategy is focused on the district office, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right, other questions?
Do I need to raise my hand?
Yeah, I don't see you otherwise. Member Jacobs and then Member Lessons.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't know if this is a question for Dr. Bryant or Mr. Ratliff. To what extent is the one tool in the board's toolbox to utilize the option of furloughs or salary freezes for, I guess, at least exempt staff, assuming that contracts would, for bargaining units might make other groups of staff more challenging or complex. Is that a tool in our toolbox? And is that something that administration will pencil out at some point to help us get from 68 to 0?
Sure. Looking at the exempt group, you'll notice that unfortunately won't get us to the $68 million, but it is something that we can look at to make the deficit a bit smaller. So in terms of what the options are, what the administration will be doing is every time we lose a position, we can leverage that as an opportunity to reorganize and streamline. And as I mentioned, there are positions that we are choosing not to fill because we know that there are a lot of cuts to be made at the district office. And to your point, something that could be looked at as not presenting any sort of cost of living increase for the exempt group. We would have less flexibility to do that for a group that has a collective bargaining agreement. But at this time, there are no plans to request an increase for cost of living for that group. So those are just a few of several levers that we have. But unfortunately, that won't make the biggest dent of all of the things in our toolbox, but it's something that we need to do our due diligence and explore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Follow-up, Member Jacobs, you good?
No, yep. I'll follow up maybe with just an email requesting some data points that if we could have by 12:10 at our work session, that'd be helpful.
Thank you. Member Lessons.
Yeah, thanks. Here, I'll lower my hand. I was thinking a little bit about the maybe a previous slide or a couple slides back when it shows the number of positions. Go forward. Yes, thank you. So there are 4,621 FTE funded in the general fund and another 900 or so that are funded by grants, and about 500 are funded by the ESSER funds in this current year. So what are the other 400 FTE positions? What grants are funding those positions? And does that mean that those individuals are not hired on a permanent basis, or they are hired permanently and we're just finding different ways to fund them? Maybe if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So the 509 are ESSER funded. Then the remaining 400 or so are by and large in title grants. So Title I and Title VI are the bigger ones, and Title VI is the special education, or 6B is the special education. But then we have ELL and gift and other grants that are in there. Predominantly it is going to be Title I and Title 6B are the bigger drivers of those.
Okay, thanks. And do we have any reason to expect that any of those grants are disappearing beyond ESSER? I mean, do we have expiration dates, or do these sort of roll over on a pretty regular basis?
The title grants have been very consistent over the years and, generally have increased. So I would expect those to keep going. Then as far as the question goes on, the employees within those grants, I think if you looked at it in terms, if you were to make reductions across the board in teachers, for example, the funding source may not come into play. It's more the collective bargaining agreement and seniority that comes into play when making those reductions.
So are the grant positions included in this data?
They are included in this, both the second and third present charts.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Stott?
Yes, I was just gonna clarify on the Title I funding in particular. While the money coming to the state has been consistent, coming to Anchorage has been consistent, we've been using the carryover for a number of years to fund, in part, the instructional coaches at the elementary to try to improve reading instruction. And what's happening is that carryover amount is declining, and we're probably going to have less than half of the availability for instructional coaches. And we've been doing that because we've been trying to spare the general fund. All of those positions, we've heard at some of the town halls, why don't you get rid of instructional coaches? Well, we will be down at least half of them just by virtue of the carryover that continues to decline. But none of those positions are general funded, so they have no impact on this issue here at all as far as the budget deficit.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Stott. Member Jacobs?
Thank you, Madam President. I think Mr. Ratliff earlier mentioned that one of the reductions potentially to administration were a reduction of maintenance staff. Did I hear that right? And I guess if it's not right now, could we get more information from Board Connect as to what that looks like? My understanding is we have a significant deferred maintenance backlog. We have a couple, thousands of minor maintenance items sitting in the application that we use. I'm just very sensitive to making sure that we have the appropriate number of staff present to maintain our facilities. And if we're reducing those staff, I guess I'm curious as to what that looks like and what our contingency plan, knowing that we have to make reductions. Looking for more info there. And if not right now, then later is fine too.
I think, yeah, there were a few maintenance staff on there. I believe Mr. Holland can probably speak to how those services would change and continue.
And I just want to underscore at a high level, these positions that we are intending to reduce or eliminate or reorganize as part of a strategy where administrators are going and ensuring that anything that we put up for removal won't impact the district's operation just in general, whether it's in maintenance and human resources. That's something that we're really sensitive to because there is a certain point where if you don't have administrators to oversee general compliance and regulation with local policies, the district could be at risk for legal exposure or potentially losing access to grants. So anything that we're putting up for removal is something that we closely looked at and feel comfortable being able to manage any sort of reorganization. So I just wanted to let you know the administration is doing their due diligence to ensure the district can operate.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bryant. Other questions? Okay. I don't see any more hands. If you have questions that come up for you after our time here, please send them. Put them in writing. That way we make sure we get them the way you want them asked. And if you can send them early, you can probably get them answered, some of them answered sooner. There's something, just a reminder, we don't need to, when you send in your questions, some of them can be answered like just right off the top of somebody's head, not necessarily mine. But the others might require, those questions that might require extensive time. Those are the ones that we have to prioritize. So but please send your questions as quickly as you can. Member Higgins, I see your hand, and then Member Lessons.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I don't know if mine's more of a question, just a comment. You know, what I'm looking for is not just these are how many dollars we have to cut, but we're leaving out kids out of the discussion, students, outcomes, what we need to do. And we may need to do things that we aren't doing right now in order to get academic scores up, something that is going to be supportive of the superintendent's goals of trying to improve academics. And I don't know how that factors into each one of these areas, what we can and cannot do, assuming what we started from scratch. Okay, I once proposed this about 15 years ago, that we assume all the schools have been leveled and we start over again. But if we're dealing with that type of issue, what do we need to include that's not there, as well as what can we cut that's going to have the least impact on academics? It's going to be the concern that I'm looking for, a linkage here from the administration with their expertise to give us that type of feed in. So we're not just talking about these options, we're given information from their perspective of what would be the best cuts to make and whether or not we have to cut even different areas to be, if we had more money, what do we need to put into it to improve academic outcomes? I mean, curriculum is just an example where we've kind of discussed an audit. We may need to do some curriculum changes to improve things. Maybe we need to change the way the delivery is done to be more successful. There are all kind of questions in there that I have in my mind, but just getting kind of a good overview picture of what we might be able to do to improve academics, what we may have to do. We don't know how much we're going to cut at the end. And then when we cut everything for the budget, to have a balanced budget right now, if we've got opportunities here to improve academics through some sort of formula or some idea, that's what I'm hoping to be able to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Thank you, Member Higgins. Member Lessons.
Thank you. I appreciate everything in this presentation. I'm thinking again about the front end with the PTR. I'm wondering, as we get closer to having to balance this budget, whether there will be options to layer things. Let's just say, for example, increasing K-12 by 1 and some other, a PTR increase of 3 or a 4 or a 5 to some of the upper grades. I mean, will the board have the ability to pick and choose essentially from
we can certainly make those calculations from the finance side, but as a matter of process, I think that's probably up to the board. Let Mark kind of speak to that too.
Yeah, this is Mark. I was just gonna, if it's okay, give the board a sort of a rough preview of our weekend work session. What we're doing is we're trying to put together an exercise whereby the board would have a combination of things that deal with, for example, the uses of one-time funds. So you take a look at things like the bond reimbursement money, you take a look at the cash, the fund balance, which we're still working on. And once we get a fine-tuned number of what that might more look like in the pro forma, these would be the things that the board could play if you choose, if you're thinking of more of a shorter term strategy. Then we're putting a list together of all the different layered potential reductions, okay? Everything from admin reductions to some of the instructional program we talked about, like Ignite and all those kinds of things. Looking at things like maybe, immersion, making it match the PTR of the neighborhood sides. What's that save? Like there's a whole bunch of these we're putting together. And the goal is, once we get a fine-tuned number on the actual budget deficit, the goal is to have each board member, either individually or in pairs or however you choose to do it, lay out a large sheet that's got these things, and you look at playing the cards where you want them to go to see if you can match this up. It kind of fits what Kelly's asking about, like a layered approach. Like, how does each board see getting to whatever the number is, 50 million, 60 million? When that number's fine-tuned, how do I get there? Each of you, and then the goal is to see if you guys have overlap in your thinking. Do 4, 5, 6 board members kind of have a rough consensus on a way forward? And that exercise at the retreat hopefully will give administration some guidance as to where your thinking is starting to lie. That's all in advance, of course, of the budget approval in February and actually giving us guidance in after the December work session. But Kelly, I think your question is yes, we will have some activities for you guys to sort of layer your approaches to see how you're thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Stott.
Thank you.
Member Lessons, you good?
Yes.
Okay. Just a couple of comments. I want to thank you guys for the presentation, especially the detail in the presentation. I really appreciate it. It's very helpful. When it comes to our PTR, wherever we land as individual board members or as a group, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But as we make our decisions, I think we're getting all the information that we need to be able to make that decision and come up with a balanced budget. We are far from it, but I think we're going to get there. And I just want us to remain as, I don't know if optimistic is the word, but for me it is. I want us to remain optimistic, cautiously optimistic that we are going to do this, and that, it's not about, it might not be about cutting, it might be about redesigning and reimagining. And so I want to keep that in mind as well. All of the scenarios that we've looked at have an element of redefining what we're doing. It also has an element of doing things differently. So I agree with Member Higgins. I agree with Member Lessons on the layering. And I just think that by the time we get to, I'm really looking forward to the December 10th work session. That is like a mini retreat, guys. So we're going to be there for a bit. But I think when we come out of that session, we'll be really poised to make some, we can probably see where we're going a little clearer. I don't know, Dr. Bryant, did you have other comments or any of the staff have other comments that you'd like to make at this time?
Thank you, Madam President. No further comments, and we just thank the board for your continued engagement and questioning so we can make the best decisions moving forward.
Okay, Dr. Stock, anything from you?
No, I appreciate your time and attention. We'll continue to bring this clearer and clearer and clearer. And I think if there's one thing that's been clear to everyone is that this is a process. It is not an event. And so this takes time. And then even as we begin to get guidance from the board, there's a lot more decisions that have to be made that will come around implementation of these ideas. So I just appreciate everybody's attention. More to come.
Mr. Gustafson? Comments?
No, I don't have anything else, but thank you for today.
All right. So board members, any last minute thoughts before we are ahead of schedule? Member Holloman?
For those of us that came late, could I get a copy of the presentation, the slides?
Absolutely. You guys, it will be posted online when we're done, but we will make sure you get a copy of everything of the presentation. We also recorded this session. It will be also uploaded to our website. And tomorrow night, and for the next 3 nights, we will have our last series of town halls. They are virtual, so I look forward to seeing everyone there. And if there's nothing else, our time together has been well spent. And I want to thank everybody, and I will see you later. I don't know that we need to, this is a work session, so we just need to adjourn ourselves. Pat, move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Moved in second. Seeing no opposition, this work session is